Here at the Peep Show podcast, we talk a lot about supporting sex workers. And one way you can support sex workers is by paying for your porn.
Why not take this opportunity to support queer porn made by queer porn stars? Queerporn.tv is offering $10 memberships all summer long. Being a Queerporn.tv VIP guest grants you access to all of their exclusive scenes featuring all kinds of queer hotties from around the world. We love it, and we know you will too. Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
News and stories from the sex industry.
With Jesse and PJ Sage. Welcome back to another episode of the Peep Show podcast. This week we talked to Lola Davina, author of the Thriving in Sex Work series, about her new book on sex work and money. We talk about the erotic charge of sex work money, the emotions that keep us from making sound financial decisions, and how we can move out of financial cycles that don't serve us.
Hey, I'm Adrian, one of the hosts of After Adult Podcast. My porn name should be Mozart Fremont, but you probably know me better by my actual porn name, Siri.
I'm Rachel, but my porn name would be Woody 16th Avenue.
After Adult is a podcast about life and porn.
I don't actually watch porn.
I don't really watch that much porn either. I probably watch more than you, but I mean, most of the time it kind of would feel like going to work on my day off.
You 100% watch more than me, because I don't watch porn. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for After Adult.
Or visit afteradult.com and follow us on Instagram at afteradult.
We're here today with Lola Davina, author of the Thriving in Sex Work series, who's spent most of the last 30 years in and around the sex industry working as a stripper, dominatrix, porn actress, and escort over a 15-year period. She earned an MA in human sexuality and an MS in nonprofit fundraising and writes a self-care and wellness column for whynotcam.com. So hi, Lola. Thanks for being here.
Hi, you two. Hi, PJ. Hi, Jesse.
Hey.
It's really great to be back.
Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We loved having you on before, so we're excited to have you back.
Yes. And we were just talking, we talked a little bit before we started recording about what tumultuous and traumatic times all of us have been going through. So
oh my gosh.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here for your listeners.
It's been
Happy
a
to hear
journey
you.
from the last time you were here, to be sure.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
Personal and global, everything.
How are you doing right now? Like, how are you dealing with the pandemic and this crazy world we're in right now?
Right. Well, I sometimes I have to laugh. So the joke for a long time for me had been, I decided at age 50 that I was going to start on a mindfulness project that I had spent a lot of my life running around, not really doing a lot of different things to distract myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was really time to get serious and settle down and pay attention to my body and pay attention to what was going on. And then it was like, and then menopause hit. And I'm like, so I decided to show up and be awake for this. And then it's like all this other shit happened in my personal life. I had my life partner had a near-death experience last year, and then we go into COVID, and I'm like, and I'm just trying to be mindful and awake for all of it. And then it's like, well,
you're like, do I really want to be awake now? I don't know.
No, I don't. There's that classic opening to, what's it called? Postcards from the Edge, where Meryl Streep crashes the car and they're pumping her stomach in the hospital. And she's like, do I have to be awake for this? And she passes out. So I'm like, this is what booze is for. This is what distractions are for.
This is the Peep Show self-help guide.
Self-help, exactly, and also known as cocktail hour. No, so it's tough. I mean, certainly balancing, trying to be present and being awake, and keeping my heart as open as I can for all the suffering that's going on in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, recharging my batteries and trying to do things that feed me. Certainly finally getting this book out 3.5 years later. I sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thought this book would be much, much easier to write than the first one. And that that turned out to be like a big cosmic joke. It was
Yeah, so
a very difficult book
let's say
to
real
write.
quick that you have a new book coming out at the beginning of September that is on sex work and money.
That's right. The title is Thriving in Sex Work and Money. And the unofficial subtitle is A Personal Finance Guide for Sex Workers.
So why was this one harder?
Well, it turns out that writing about money is an incredibly humbling endeavor. It's very, very. So taking a step back, to me, the most important thing as a writer is to speak as directly as I can to my reader. That's my sacred vow. I try to do the very best that I can. Not everyone writes like that, and not everyone should write like that, but that's very definitely my intent.
I like that you write that way because you make it very explicit that it's like a conversation between you and the person that's reading it.
Right. I want that. I don't want this to be like, hey, I'm Lola Davina and I'm an expert and it's all about me and me. It's like, no, actually, this book is for you.
Yeah.
This book is intended for you. I the only reason I'm writing this is because I want to be here with you.
Yeah.
Solving these problems. The first book you could easily just boil it down and distill it, and you could take every line and every page and every idea in it, you could boil it down into like maybe a one sentence. It would be, you know what you feel. You know who you are. You know what you need. Just trust yourself. Trust yourself. Trust what you feel. Take care of yourself. Feel what you need to feel. But believe in yourself. That would be that would be like the core elemental essence of the first book.
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about money, it was a far more complicated encapsulation. A much trickier question, which if I had to boil it down would be, you deserve to be here. You deserve to have whatever it is you need to survive and to thrive. You deserve that. But, here's the but, we live in the real world with very real world constraints, with a world that does not distribute resources equally, that does not value all human beings equally. Whatever bullshit, I mean, the whole notion of like, oh, every little child is we love all children, all life. We love all life. No, we don't.
Right.
No, we don't. I can walk out of my house and I can point to 5 different homeless people that we have decided as a society their lives literally don't mean anything.
Right.
They can die out there. That's fine.
Yeah.
The way we treat,
we're seeing that so clearly right now. Oh,
it's just so vivid. It's so in your face. Like, obviously we're seeing this with the Black Lives Matter movement. We can, a police officer can kneel on a man's neck for 9 minutes and people can be videotaping him and he can die right in front of you. And it's like, well, shit happens, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we are just seeing these gross, disgusting, horrific inequities.
Yeah.
It's profound the way that we treat one another and the way that we value one another is so skewed. So trying to write a book directly to the sex work population. I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to get so meta and so deep, but really, you asked me why this book was hard to write.
Yeah.
I wanted to write a book to really drill down and touch that question, which is to say, as sex workers, we deserve to be here. We deserve to thrive. We deserve to have money. We deserve to work safely. We deserve to have families and love, to have a future. We deserve all of that. That is our birthright, and we can claim it. But let me just take a step back. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done, right? To just even be able to claim that. So I know that sounds really deep. Hopefully the book is not that. It's not that.
The
Not
book
that
is very accessible.
oh,
Yeah.
I hope so. I pray. I get on my hands and knees and pray. That's my hope. But that is the core question that I felt like I needed to address. And oh my God,
Mhm.
that's powerful, profound, and difficult. I
Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated with like the sex work population in particular, I think. And you touched a little bit on this in your book that we get all of these mixed messages like, oh, sex workers are rolling in money, or sex workers only care about money, or sex
Mhm.
workers are destitute. And there doesn't seem to be uh, anything in between those like extreme
Right.
narratives about the relationship between sex workers and money.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's the same weird. There's the same weird gulf also too about like shame and envy and stuff around sex work. Like either sex workers are like disposable and disgusting and have no boundaries and have
Mm-hmm.
they've given up on themselves and they have they're just like pieces of trash. Or else they live on fantasy island where everyone is perfect and hot and like nothing ever sags and dicks are always hard and everybody's running around and fucking all the time and there's all this money and there's all this like
Yeah.
coochie like and it's like this very elevated or like exaggerated bubble world or else this
Mm-hmm.
like disgusting degraded underworld and the vast majority of us are just like living our normal right
Right, right.
living our lives so yeah so carving out that middle ground but I definitely wanted to talk about the notion of financial trauma right that so
Yeah.
many of us feel reason why so many of us come to sex work in the first place no, certainly
Mhm.
not everyone but healing some of that damage of just feeling like we belong here life has chosen us to be here
Right.
we have to believe that for ourselves.
But at the same time, I think, you seem to be making the point in the book that like we can't just will away those constraints or those societal assumptions or those unfairnesses. And so we also have to face that reality while affirming our right to be here and
Right.
right to,
Right.
live and be
Right.
happy in
Yes,
this world.
and you've just pointed to the crux and the difficulty of the book, which is to hold, like there's this beautiful Buddhist practice where you hold your longing or your desire, right? I want to feel financially secure in one hand, right?
Mhm.
And then on the other hand, you hold the lack of that wish. So
Yeah.
I have my wish in one hand and I'm holding the truth that that wish is not fulfilled in this moment and being able to hold them both and to know that they're contained and that we can see them both and we can honor them and we can work towards fulfilling them.
Mhm.
But it requires being awake to this and not running away from it and checking out and acting fearfully and
It's interesting that you say like acting fearfully because I think that one of the things that's really hard about sex work, I mean, there's so many things that are hard about sex work, but one of the things I think is that it's so uncertain that it's really easy to get stuck in like a cycle of fear. Like you don't know if business is going to totally dry up or what's going to come next and how much money you're going to make and what's going to be possible and what's not going to be possible. And there's like all of these like messages that you kind of have to quiet about whether you're going to be able to make it in this or not.
absolutely. Oh, you've touched on it's such an important thing and there's so much competition and am I going to age
Mhm.
out or all of my
Yeah.
clients going to all of a sudden decide that I'm hideous and
Yeah.
run away, whatever
Or
it
get
is, whatever.
bored or go somewhere else or maybe I'm
Right.
not like, it's interesting because I've been reading some things and about different like sex workers and their like approaches to sex work. And it was funny because I had this thought the other day where so many of them were talking about how part of what they're doing is always performing happiness so that their customers feel comfortable spending money. And I was like, shit, I don't do that. I'm too real. I need to like change my I need to
Like,
change my approach so that I don't like say what I'm actually feeling. And then I was like, no, that just because that's what somebody does doesn't mean that like I'm destined to like, poverty because I don't put on a smiley face 24/7.
absolutely. And being able to hold, again, that vision for yourself that there's going to be people who only want to go to sex workers who engage in happy talk. And then there's going to
Yeah.
be a whole clientele that's just like desperate for the real,
Right.
desperate to know who you genuinely are, and and feel safe that they can talk about what they're really going through right now, and to be seen in that way. And but yeah, it's you can get so pulled out of shape, bent out of shape, just seeing what everyone else is doing and saying like, oh, I need to do that too.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, seeing somebody talk about, "Oh, well, I make more money when I do this." And I'm like, "Oh, man." It's really easy to get caught up in maybe that's why I'm not making enough money because I'm not doing these things that other people are doing. And then you have to like step back and think, but that's a different person with a different personality who has a different clientele, and it's hard, especially in the way that we advertise, I think. It's in this like very public way where it's hard not to compare yourself against other people's businesses.
Oh, yeah, I hear you loud and clear. It's so very true. And then it's not like we can all like run to some authority, like some boss or some, you know, I don't know, some
Yeah.
sex work like on The Voice or something, like where you have a panel. We've got J Lo and we've got like, Alicia Keys, and they're like
Yeah.
folding their arms and nodding their heads and going like, no, 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 your ad's good. No, your ad's good. Or I don't know, whatever you need. Like some other person that you can turn to give you that affirmation or give you that praise or feeling like you're on the right track. That so
Right.
I just this is something I certainly experienced as a self-published author, but I remember how much more keenly it cut to the bone when I was doing this as a sex worker, which is just like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, and I don't have anyone to tell me, um,
Yeah.
and that's painful.
Mhm.
And staying true to ourselves and staying true to our core, especially when both sex and money are at
Right.
stake.
It's also there's no clear, I mean, this is another thing I think that's hard about sex work and about writing too. I mean, I'm also a writer, and so I think these are similar sorts of career paths, but there's no chain of command, there's no hierarchy, there's no like structure that you can look at and be like, "Oh yeah, I'm actually like progressing in this career." Like there's no measure. So you it's hard to know if you're even heading in the right direction or what that
Right.
would be.
Right. I That is one of the things I do try to help people crystallize a vision for. So was it
Mhm.
I mean, I know obviously the most obvious metric for most people is going to be how much money they're making.
Sure,
Right.
right.
But at the same time too, and I just watching so many people in my life who are self-employed struggle in
Mhm.
various ways, there's also how much free time do you have?
Yeah.
Um, how efficient is your time? Some of it may be how much feedback are you getting from your clients or from your fans that
Yeah.
feeds you, right? There are different ways to think about being successful.
Mhm.
Just about, how many Twitter followers you have, or even how much money you make, because that can get distorted, right?
Right.
Um, oh, I'm making so much money a week, but I'm working 100 hours a week. So I basically have no other time for anything else. That's
Yeah.
not sustainable for most people.
Mhm.
So trying to think about success and trying to think about improving your business model in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think another thing that a lot of people struggle with, I know we struggle with, is sort of moving goalposts, that like you sort of feel like you kind of set these goals, but because there isn't like someone external to you telling you what your goals should be, then you kind of feel like, well, what am I supposed to do next? What am I supposed to be working on next? And it's hard to just like take a moment and be like, wow, no, I actually, succeeded at something, and to, I don't know, be happy about that.
No, no. What you've said is really important, and that whole idea. One of the things I do, and this is something I've just started doing in the last 5 years or so, and again, as a self-published author, so I have a lot of lists, a lot of to-do lists, and I cross things off, and some of them are on my computer, and some of them are on my phone, and some of them I write out by hand. I've taken to keeping them.
Mm-hmm.
I used to just throw them away. And now what I do every once in a while is I go back and I look at them. And I look at these gnarly ass lists of all these chores that I had from a year and a half ago. And I look at it and go, and I realize I don't have to do any of that shit. I did that all. I crossed off all those things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a year and a half ago, that list filled my day.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
now that list has no meaning anymore. And there's
Uh-huh.
something really affirming about that. I always write about celebrating your successes, and I'm really shitty at it. That is another thing. And sometimes it's helpful to have somebody external to you to be kind of like in charge of the celebrations.
Mm-hmm.
When you've achieved this milestone, let's celebrate whatever it is, even if it's just going out and getting ice cream, or even if it's just putting out that announcement on social media and getting it reflected back to you, getting that praise
Right.
and that congratulations, whatever it is. It is very important to find ways to be connected to our successes than just being rather than just our failures, and just thinking of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves as constant work in progress.
I think part of that too is connected to this idea of, financial traumas that you're talking about earlier. Just that, for those of us who have struggled in the past, there's always this fear of backsliding, right? There's always this fear of like going backwards to a point when, things were more difficult. And that leaves like a lingering sense of insecurity that I don't know. I know I struggle with.
Yes, definitely. That notion, I included the poem at the very beginning of the book, and I wrestled with whether or not I wanted to go that dark and go that deep. But I included the poem A Litany for Survival by
Mm-hmm.
Audre Lorde, which
Audre
is one
Lorde,
of my
yeah.
all-time favorite poems. But there's a very famous refrain that the second half of the poem is more famous than the first, but it talks about when our bellies are full, we're afraid that we'll never eat again. And when our bellies are empty, we're afraid we'll never eat again. And when
Yeah.
we have love,
Mm-hmm.
we are afraid that love will go away. And um, it's this that somehow this notion that fear is our default state of being. That
Yeah.
that fear is actually where we belong, and that if something better happens, if we have a breakthrough, if we punch through, we do a little bit better, that is only a temporary reprieve
Mm-hmm.
from our true default setting, which is the fearful place. And I understand that, and I know so deeply why that is. That's how so many of us feel. And just to spend some time with that worldview, and just to take a look at it and just say, does that genuinely, first of all, does that genuinely reflect my
Yeah.
life, and,
Mm-hmm.
and the state of the world and what I
Mm-hmm.
deserve? Or is there a possibility that that's how I was raised, that's how I was molded,
Right.
but I can actually take steps to move out of that, so that that can be something that was true for me in the past, but is not true for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I do try to write to that. I do try to address that anxiety, that gnawing fear that whatever happens, the bad thing is always going to come back and take it all away.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, how do you, sorry, PJ, I didn't
No,
mean
go
to
ahead.
cut you off. I was going to say, how do you think, or what sort of impact do you think that fear has on our financial decision making? Because I think you touched a little bit on that in the book.
Yeah, definitely. I write quite a bit about what I call the overwhelm, um, the feeling of being overwhelmed, the feeling of thinking when it comes to thinking about money, right? That
Mm-hmm.
there's this. Okay, I'm going to think about my financial situation. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to be really good. I'm going to balance my checkbook. I'm going to look at my investments. I'm going to, you know, do all the things. I'm
Yeah.
going to be a grown up. And then this fog sets in, and this fog can take lots of different shapes and forms. It's like, oh, I'm bored now. I don't want to do this anymore. Or
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling, I don't know what the right thing to do is. I'm not smart enough to figure this out. or, you know what, this seemed like a really good idea, but there's something else I need to do that's more important. I'll get back to it. Like
Yeah.
all these different ways we check out, all these different ways that we know that our finances are really important,
Yeah.
but we can't find a way to really be present with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I divide the book into two sections, and I hope I've been talking about this book in a very abstract way, and I hope I haven't turned all your listeners off to it.
No.
I really do try to address the emotional half of this in the first
Mm-hmm.
half of the book, and really say, like, look, the only way you're ever going to get good at money is if you find a way to be totally present with money.
Right.
So, and I try to talk the reader through that, and give them tools for managing that. And then in the second half of the book, I lay out pretty remedial, pretty, basic personal finance 101, but looking at all the different things that we need to do to be good at money, including earning money and spending and budgeting and paying our taxes. And, what do we do about when we want to loan our money to our best friend, and looking at money from kind of this very practical nuts and bolts side.
Right.
So, but yes, that if we are overwhelmed, if we're in the overwhelm, if fear has if we're looking through our fear glasses, it's very hard to make good decisions, long-term decisions.
Right. Well,
It's
it's hard to look at. It's hard to even then, look at the situation in a way
Yes.
that's useful, because you're like, oh shit, I don't want to open that account, because then I'd see how much money I spent on my credit card, and I don't know.
It's too much, or I don't want to be assertive with this client because I really, really need them, and
Yeah.
they're running roughshod over me, and damaging my mental health, but I don't know how to say no, because right now
Right.
I feel like it's the only thing that's keeping the lights on.
Yeah, I know.
There's
I
all,
don't know any like sex workers, like myself included, who haven't weighed out like a toxic client, that's a big spender, and been like, oh shit, can I put up with this a little bit more, or do I need to like cut this person off? And what am I going to do when I cut this person off?
yeah, it's real. It's very, and I know that just for myself, that what I just used to do was just shut down. And again,
Mhm.
just check out. And then I just find, different ways to distract myself, or I
Yeah.
one of the things I write about, so I write about all these verbs, these action verbs, that money is all about verbs. So it means, so money, rather than just like, oh, this is like a stack of bills that I have like tucked away somewhere, or it's like it's a number in an account, like it's digits in an electronic account. I want to throw that out. I want to think about money in terms of the doings of money, the action of money. So that means having money, like keeping it safe. It means earning money,
Mhm.
saving money, spending money, investing money. It means borrowing. It means, or paying loans back. It means giving out your money to someone and asking for it back. So there's all these activities. I really wanted to think about money in terms of action. But if we're not awake, and if we're being driven by fear or boredom, or any other anger, or any other like emotion that's clouding our vision, what we
Mhm.
tend to do is we tend to focus on one piece of it. Like, okay, so I'm feeling insecure about money, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to earn as much money as I can no matter what, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's part of the plan, but if you're not looking at how you're spending it, right? Or if you're not
Yeah.
looking at your mental and physical health,
Right.
then you're out of whack. Or
Yeah.
um, I am really, fearful about money, so all I'm going to do is save. Okay, well, good. Saving, excellent. Saving is good. Saving is virtuous. Everyone's encouraging you to save. But if you're not, if the rest of your life is all out of whack, if you're not enjoying your money, you're like this little fearful person just sitting on this pile of bills, right?
Mhm.
You're not living. You're like you're hoarding something,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I try to take a look at the emotional side of this, but say that then what we need to do is open up space and open up imagination so that we can look at all of the things that we do around money with a calm, mature adult mindset, and so that we can
Mhm.
be looking at our entire financial ecosystem healthfully.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Mhm. Yeah. So I I think that this is the way that you set this all up is really great. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to what's unique about the relationship between like sex workers and money. And I mean, I know that, you are a sex worker and have spent a lot of your life like that. So you're coming out of your own experience. But what do you think is different about, beyond that, what do you think is different about how sex workers interact with money, or why this would be good for like our particular community?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. So, anytime you turn someone on for a living, if that's your
Mm-hmm.
job, to sexually arouse them,
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be an emotional reaction, right? There's no
Mm-hmm.
way to be sexual and to arouse other people to get that response without emotions being part of the mix. And that
Yeah.
could be very, very positive. It can be life affirming and, be all turned on and have everything sexy happen and have all this wonderful juice going. And it can be great. It can feel, like pulling teeth. It can feel really just like dumb and hard. It can sometimes be really depressing.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these emotions are floating in the air just around the fact that we're being sexual,
Right.
putting ourselves out sexually, being judged sexually, having other people respond to us, bringing all their baggage. That very
Mm-hmm.
much was the conversation that I had in the first book. Now I'm taking a look in the second book and saying like, oh yeah, we're also just going to we're just going to throw money on top of it. Like, no problem. No, that's just, I mean, this is, I
Yeah.
realized the first thing was so easy that even just throwing this other thing on top of it is just going to be super easy too, right? So sex and money, it's just the already so complex. You're just squaring it, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
exponentially more complicated. So some general observations you could make that what does it mean? What does sex work? Money mean? What does the money mean from what we earn from sex work?
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's really loaded, right? Um, not everyone has, not everyone in sex work like gets large sums of money in very small bursts, but a lot of us do. If you're escorting or making porn or things like that,
Mm-hmm.
you go in, you do your couple of hours, and you walk away with money, like money right away, right? That kind of lump sum.
Immediate. Yeah.
Yeah, rather than like, some people who cam and stuff like that, maybe they're getting paid every couple of weeks, maybe they're getting paid out whenever they reach a certain goal. So then maybe it's a little bit more regulated. But a lot of sex work has a very feast or famine flow to it, right? Or even when you
Right.
get on camp, like maybe you've made X amount of money on Saturday night last week, but you get on cam on a Tuesday morning and nothing's happening, right? So you're
Right.
constantly dealing with this kind of what's the distinction? They talk about the distinction between a slot machine and a vending machine, right? Sex
Mm-hmm.
work is very definitely a slot machine where you put your energy in, you pull the handle, and maybe money comes out, and maybe it doesn't,
Right.
Right.
right?
Yeah. And
Uh,
sometimes way more than you expect. And sometimes you put like tons of energy in and like nothing comes out.
Nothing comes out, and so that's a lot already right there energetically to deal with. And then when you're
Yeah.
talking about your finances, um, what I found from so many different books that I read, all these different personal finance books that I read, because again, I want your listeners to know very clearly, I am not personal finance expert at all. I wrote this book very much from a place of humility, like I'm learning as I go too, but I'm trying to offer the very best advice that I can. So many books, personal finance books, are written from the standpoint of, oh, well, first of all, of course, you obviously have a boss. Also, secondly, you obviously get a paycheck every 2 weeks, and you obviously have a 401k plan that somebody is putting money into, and you can obviously go in and ask for a raise or ask for a better job title or make a move out of the company into something. I mean, like none of this.
Right.
Like
What is this universe you speak of?
I know, like this is like none of this applies to me. Thank you so much. Like, thank you
Yeah.
for all this help. This is garbage. So so much of dealing with money as a sex worker is dealing with the fact that you are self-employed. And
Right.
so there is just nowhere near enough. I don't think there's nowhere near enough information out there on helping self-employed people manage the
Right.
ups and downs of flows of money. So there's that. And then this is not true for everyone. But I conducted a survey at the very, very outset of this book 3 years ago, a long time ago. I couldn't believe it how long ago this had been. But I conducted this survey before I even started writing this book because I wanted to get a lot of feedback from the community, and so I thought that would help me formulate the ideas in the book. And I was surprised. One of the questions that I asked in this survey was, does the money that you earn from sex work feel any different than money earned from an ordinary straight job?
Yeah.
And I was surprised that only about 2/3 of sex workers responded yes. I thought it would be a little bit higher.
Still pretty high.
I would have thought. Well, I thought it would have been higher, but anyway, it's just and not scientific or anything like that. But it was interesting to get the feedback that quite a few people were like, no, it's just like money, like anything else. It's like it's no big deal. But I think I can also speak from personal experience and from just from people that I've talked to and people in my orbit, that the money earned from sex work feels charged. It feels different.
Yeah.
This is sexy money. This is
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels very sexy and feels very fun, and sometimes it feels really shitty. Sometimes that money feels like,
Right.
oh fuck, I did all that and all I got was that. Like that stack of
Yeah.
money is just like, that money is not worth what I had to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that most people working a 9-to-5 job feel that way about their paycheck every month. They don't look at their paycheck and go like, oh my God. Like, I mean, maybe they're not happy with that number, but it doesn't have that same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true, and I've thought about this a lot because I've thought about all of I mean, I think this is a really important like political strategy, and I'm not trying to like disparage it at all, but all of the insistence that like sex work is work and it's just a job, yeah, I think that that's important, but also it's not just a job; it's like a very different kind of job, and I think that we should be able to like have a conversation too about why is it different than other types of jobs.
I agree. And there is a really interesting conversation, I think, to be had there about strategy in terms of like, I think of it almost like sex work is like this wild vacant lot, right? Like in the culture, like it's overgrown and it hasn't been tended to. And like the first thing to do is go in and like cut down all the weeds. And that's like the sex workers work argument. Just like saying, look, we just need like a basic fundamental understanding that like sex is something that people turn to keep themselves alive, to keep themselves fed. This is part of our economy. Fucking deal with it. So that's just clearing the vacant lot. But once the weeds are cleared out, there's time to plant the seeds of these other ideas, like what you're talking about. There's time for more subtlety and distinctions and things like that. But
about like what does it mean to dive into somebody's like fantasy that may or may not make you comfortable for money, or what is it like to to be intimate with somebody that you may have negative feelings towards for money, or there's all sorts of things that make it different than other jobs. And I know people go to work and hate their boss, but I don't think that's the same. It's not really the same.
It's not. And sexuality is such a deep part of ourselves, right? And it touches us to our very beings, and so much of how we're viewed and valued in society is for our sexual appeal and our sexual attractiveness, and how other people respond to us sexually and things like that. So it is very, very, very intimate, and it is there's no other. You certainly can't get around that fact.
Now is a good time to hit the pause button and head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Even $1 a month shows us that you care and want to see Peep Show continue to thrive. Also, you can help increase our reach with a review on iTunes. Right. And it's more of a direct, because it's such a like core part of our beings too. I think it's a much more direct reflection of us, it can get like caught up in your psyche in ways that are different than like, oh, I wasn't so good at making that table, but that didn't work out. But when it's like a rejection of your like sexuality or your attractiveness, or not even a rejection, but these things are very personal.
For sure. I'm always mindful of how the vast majority of, and this is as a, I mean, this is as a, I don't know if it's as it should be. But this is how it is, that the vast majority of sex workers are very, very young.
Mm-hmm.
People just learning about their sexualities, learning about
Right.
their
Right.
personalities, learning about their boundaries. Uh, and so that can be really tricky too, because
Mm-hmm.
and then obviously clients, fans, the demand side is also going to be bringing a ton of their baggage.
Right.
They're
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily going to be the most clear-minded, woke, um, you know,
Yeah.
like sorted out people either. They're bringing a lot of their
Mm-hmm.
garbage in big flaming bags for sex workers to have to fucking deal with. So it
Right.
is very, very complicated. I'll just leave it at that. We can all agree it's very complicated. I know there was a question
Yeah.
back there a few minutes ago, and maybe I lost the train of thought, but we can certainly all agree about that.
Yeah, no, I think we were just talking about the fact that it's a complicated thing, and money's complicated, and so bringing all of those things together create like a really emotionally charged space. I think we brought this up because you were talking about the survey that you did where only 2/3 of people said that the money felt different.
And again, I did find that a little bit surprising. I guess part of it for me is this is just me outing myself here or getting real. I had such an erotic charge to the money that I earned from sex work,
Mm-hmm.
both from, especially from stripping and especially from escorting. It was
Yeah.
very definitely an erotic charge, which didn't mean like, like 2 weeks later, like if I had a stack of $500 from some client, like I was like rubbing it on myself, but it was like the money, having that money for that exchange was definitely a turn on for me. It
Yeah.
definitely, and it made me feel rich, and it made me feel powerful, and it made me feel, sometimes it even made me feel invincible, in
Mm-hmm.
ways that no other money has ever made me feel.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too because I think sometimes, I've had clients who've said things like, well, you know, are you just in this for the money? They especially regulars, that it's
Yeah.
not like that at the beginning, but once they become like emotionally invested, then they're afraid that you are only interested in the money. And part of me always feels when I hear that, but that's so exciting. Like, it's it's not that it's just like, it's not that you're using somebody for the money, but it's part of like the excitement of the exchange too. The
Absolutely.
fact
I
that
mean,
they disparage it as like, oh, well, I think it's missing something to assume that that's a negative thing.
there's something. So you've touched on such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful idea, and maybe it's one that I didn't write enough about. The next book I'm going to write is going to be on relationships. So I'm definitely I know that this is going to be part of what I'm going to talk about. So certainly for the sex worker, the money is this absolutely concrete, stone cold, undeniable statement of their worth, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You are worth this to me, Jesse. I want to spend time. You know how badly I want to spend time with you? Let me pay you to spend time with. That's how much I
Right.
want you. Like that is
Yeah.
pretty fucking raw. Um,
Right.
Now, I also understand, however, I understand on multiple levels that from the client's viewpoint, there's an inequity now of desire, right? There's an inequity
Right.
of,
Mm-hmm.
well, Jesse, you don't want to be with me. I have to
Yeah.
pay you to be with me. So obviously,
Right.
you don't feel about me the way that I feel about you. That inequity is built in.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I understand that insecurity. I do wish there was a way that we could talk to the clients who can hear it, to the
Yeah.
clients who can receive
Mm-hmm.
it, who can take this in. The idea of your money is literally supporting me. Your money literally helps me live.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I have what, I don't know if you want to use a great big word that starts with L. I love you for that. I like you for that. I
Yeah.
appreciate you for that. I have my heart and mind and cunt are full because this is the way that you come to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may be a little bit heartbreaking to realize that I will not bring that for you if you don't bring that money because this is my job.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
please know that I am showing up for you.
Right.
And this is how
Mm-hmm.
I feel about this, rather than being like, oh, yeah, you're just some fucking loser who I would like, I don't even like and I would never even look at. That's not it. That's
Well,
not it
no,
at
yeah, because
all.
I don't think that that's the it's usually not the implication of that. It's not that you don't have any affection for them. It's that like it's a transactional relationship and that's not a bad thing.
Totally. And I mean, I certainly have known people who have felt very insecure, for instance, around like, say, the whole notion of psychotherapy. Like, why
Yeah.
should you pay someone to listen to your problems? Why should you pay for someone to be your friend? Well, it's like, well, because they can do things that friends can't do.
Right.
They can hold space that friends, that's exhausting to be a friend and have to hold that up, or to delve, or
Mhm.
to listen, or to sit perfectly still and be perfectly present. That's a lot to ask of a friend.
Right.
Um, therapists are trained how to do that.
Mhm.
Um, so it's hard, and I think there can be a gender component to it, like the whole notion. I mean, I certainly know that I felt when I was working that a lot of the rage that a lot of the men came at me with was this notion of like, why can't I get what I want from women for free? Why can't I get the
Yeah.
sex I want? Why can't I get the emotional connection that I want? And why won't you give me what I want for free? Um,
Mhm.
and that you can talk a lot about male entitlement and
Right.
men's inability to like ask for what they need or get what they need from women, or not just treat women like fucking public utilities that you should be able,
Right.
you should just be able to fill up your emotional gas can and not have to pay for it ever. Like we can
Right.
certainly talk about that.
And that men get more money for, the work that they do,
Right. Right.
unfairly. Yeah.
For sure. And it's like, oh, I would, it's like, I'm just thinking as, like, where I'm at in life right now. It's like, if I've got a stack of bills, like, can I just like run up to any man that I want and like, here, I need you to sexually affirm me. I need you to look me in the eye. I need you to tell me all these things. Here's my list of things that I need from you. And I'm like, here's some money for that. Can you just like do that for me, please? Like, it's like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just like, it's just so far removed, like this whole industry is set up for, to like give men what they need, and then it's like, well, what if women wanted to get what they needed? It's like, oh yeah, I don't know, that's kind of weird, right? I don't know. Can that happen? I don't know. What do women really want? I mean, what would I have to do? I don't know. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole like discussion is I think it's really important. Another thing that I think that I really appreciated that you did, especially in the beginning of the book, is bringing up the fact that like a whole discussion of like privilege and how we view like privilege within the industry, like among sex workers. And I think it was, I'm trying to think of like what exactly it is that I want to say about this, but I feel like you did a really great job of saying, okay, the work that I did, was coming from a place of privilege. I did mostly indoor work, but that doesn't mean that like the background that you came from was particularly privileged. And,
Right. And you talk a lot, you open the book a lot with your own personal history and struggles, which I thought was really powerful and like, helpful as a reader to make me sort of trust that you were coming from, a situation that I could relate to. So you like kind of talk about it on both levels.
Well, thank you. Yeah, again, in going back to the difficulty of writing the book was, how can I, as white, middle
mhm,
class, multiple master's degrees, in a a comfortable financial situation, how can I talk to how can I talk to my reader? And
yeah,
I can't say everyone, because obviously there's no possible way that I can talk to everyone.
right.
But how can I talk to as many people as possible and make myself relatable, and and humble myself to offer information that will be useful to as many people as possible, and not just talk about my
Uh-huh.
own experience as if like, oh, well, if you just do it like me, then it's going to be super obvious and easy. Um, but I did, you're right, PJ, I did want to include the story of the multiple stories. I tell my story from multiple angles because I think it's also one of the things that we get down to when we're talking about money is we can talk about privilege, and it is important to talk about privilege.
Yeah.
It's important to
Mm-hmm.
talk about white skin privilege and middle class privilege and educational privilege and gender and the ability, how physically attractive we are in
Yeah.
whatever
Mm-hmm.
in the culture. This is all deeply meaningful, but for each person it will be complex.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no one title, there's no one lens that we can look at any person and say, oh, well, then obviously because you're fill in the blank, this is how your life is going to be. And this is how sex work is going to work for you. And this is how money is going to work for you. There is no one lens that we can look at any one individual. It is all complex. And
Mm-hmm.
like in my own story, I come from tremendous privilege. There's no question about it. White skin, education, middle class, college educated parents, the whole thing. On the other
Mm-hmm.
hand, and you might not know this to look at me or to listen to me talk, I grew up with real food insecurity. I grew up
Mm-hmm.
with, you know, one parent who was like a raging alcoholic, the other one was deeply mentally, profoundly mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with tons of insecurity, neglect. I mean, I don't even get into some of the dark shit that happened in my. I don't even go to all the
Yeah.
places that happened in my life. So I have this very, very complex relationship to money and to scarcity and all these things. I'm just one person. So it is when we try to think about money, when we try to think about the world and think about how each and every one of us can carve out our place in this world, in this complex, fucked up world,
Mm-hmm.
where are inequities in every single which way we look. We treat different people differently across all different kinds of metrics.
Right.
How do we carve out that fundamental core belief for ourselves that we belong and we deserve and that we matter?
Mm-hmm.
And that is really what I try to drill down into in the book, the best I can, to the best of my
Yeah.
limited ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that really like highlights how complicated these things are and how you can't just assume that. Yeah, you can't just assume. I don't think that people have that there's one like straightforward narrative for different people.
There's not. No, there's just not.
Yeah.
And I am not the person, and I never will be the person who'll say like, and not to, this is not to denigrate anybody who does write these kinds of books, but to say this is how I earned $160,000 a year escorting or whatever, because I
Right,
know
right.
that story is not going to be relatable for everybody. People
Right.
can write those kinds of books. I think those books are helpful, but I really wanted to write the book that really just said, look, wherever you come from, whatever your past history is going to be, I'm going to try and meet you where you're at. I'm going to
Yeah.
try and talk you through getting to a place where maybe if you didn't have the basic financial education that you needed, I'm going to be here to give it to you. I'm going to do it
Yeah.
the best I can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who works in the industry too, because recently, I guess a couple of months ago, more toward the beginning of COVID, we did this like special episode of the podcast where we had people send in like just little audio diaries about how they're doing as sex workers during COVID. And there was 16 of them, and we,
Uh-huh.
put them together. And when I was reflecting with a friend of mine about the different stories that people were telling, she was saying, what's really interesting about this is it kind of shows what I already assumed, which is that is the fact that people just don't experience sex work in the same way. So, there were some people who were like, porn is totally recession proof. Like my business is booming because everybody's at home. And there were other people who were like, this is terrible. My business is like falling apart, and that, and everything in between,
Yeah.
and so a book that's, how can you make $160,000 a year as an escort, isn't taking into consideration that like the way that you're experiencing something isn't at all going to be applicable to all people who are doing the same sort of work.
Nope. No, there just simply is no universal experience of this work. And I think
Yeah.
that just, returning to that again and again, it's a humility that I think that anybody who wants to speak in this space needs to continually be returned to. Um,
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, based on all sorts of things, based on class and based on race and based on size and
yeah, but also like obviously if you were, if you were already an established cam person when COVID hit, your
right.
experience is going to be very different than somebody who was working in a strip club.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
couldn't be more different, right? I mean,
Right.
like
Mm-hmm.
night and day. Like, camming, boobing,
Yeah.
stripping,
Close down.
close down, no more. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's just so it's you hit on a really important point. And another thing about the sex industry is that it's always changing. It is one of the most dynamic industries out there.
Mm-hmm.
Always seizing on the newest technology, rushing into fill when whenever
Yeah.
there's some kind of disruption. People getting into it because out of financial need or getting out of it because the business has changed so much. There's always churn.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're running low on time, but another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is in the introduction, speaking about COVID again, you talk about the fact that you entered into the sex industry at times where there was also a lot of like political upheaval and the AIDS crisis. And I'm curious, like, what you think, like, what sort of advice you would give to sex workers now who are relatively new, who are afraid that, there isn't going to be work for them or how they're going to weather this storm. I mean, I know nobody knows what's going to happen, but what would you say as somebody who's, gone through these
Different disruptions.
different disruptions. I was trying to think of the
Definitely.
best way to say it.
No, I actually ended up writing an author's foreword because this just just the timing of this is so crazy. I
Mm-hmm.
finished the manuscript the second week of March. It also happens to be my birthday week, so it was like I finished the manuscript. I was having my
Oh, my
birthday.
birthday's then too.
Oh,
Are you Pisces?
I am a Pisces. Listen, I don't talk about the specific day, but yes, I'm definitely a Pisces. So I'm like handing this thing off and like celebrate, yay, book done, book everything, and then like a week later, it's like fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's shutting down, this, that, the other, total disaster. Like,
Yeah.
um, just watching everything melt down. And I fell into this profound depression for about a week where I was like, I just wrote this book. This was 3.5 years of my life. And I don't know if this book even makes sense anymore. Does this book
Mm,
Yeah.
even,
yeah.
will this book even speak to anyone? And then I had to kind of pick myself up off the floor and go back and read it again. And I write in this forward. I share some of my experiences talking about the fact that the very first time I got hired as a stripper was just 10 weeks after the major earthquake in San Francisco in 1989. The earthquake was in 1989. I got hired just like January of 1990.
Yeah.
And I mean, the streets were, they were still like, dead bodies and, it was still like
Oh my
the,
God.
the,
Yeah.
the Bay Area was completely traumatized.
Yeah.
I started working during the AIDS crisis,
Yeah.
escorting during the AIDS crisis. And then when I went away from sex work and came back to it in my early 30s, my life, I was going through a divorce. I had just filed for personal bankruptcy and I was like getting back into escorting to get my financial house in order. And then 9/11 hit. Um,
Yeah.
and if it was 20 years ago, I don't know how much folks remember, but the economy just completely
Yeah.
cratered, and then people were. There was some asshole sending anthrax through the mail. I don't know if people
I
remember
Right.
that,
remember that. Yeah.
but
I mean,
fuck
I'm older than a lot of
up.
sex workers, but yeah, I remember that.
It was fucked up,
Yeah.
It
and
was a
people were
scary time.
terrified. Yeah, and here I am. I had moved back to San Francisco. I was just signing a lease on an in-call apartment for downtown, and like thinking like I was gonna like get all these businessmen to come and visit me at lunch, and it was like I literally remember thinking, is it not even, is there going to be, I remember thinking, is there going to be a sex industry 6 months from now? Is there going to be an economy 6 years from now? Are there going to be airplanes? Are there going to be
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do not mean to trivialize anything about this particular moment, because this moment
It's
is
scary. Yeah.
scary and terrible in ways that I think maybe we don't even fully know yet.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there, at least I experienced this on an ongoing basis. We don't even really know if the worst is yet to come. We don't know. There is not this sense yet that we've turned a corner.
Right.
Things could, when we get into this winter things could, the election, things could get worse.
Mm-hmm.
So I do not mean to trivialize or in any way like put on a smiley face and just say it's all going to get better. But here's what I can say: the sex industry meets a profound human need. There,
Mm-hmm.
I think certainly for many decades to come, there will be a place for people to engage in the sex industry, to sell their sexuality. There will be demand. This industry, it is constantly changing. It is constantly, like I said earlier, chasing the next technological, discovery, and it's impacted all the time by legislation and by societal changes, all those things. But I have no doubt there will be a sex industry 6 months
Yeah.
from now, a year from
Mm-hmm.
now, 2 years from now. Now, what it will look like and who's going to thrive and who's going to fall off, not be able to make it, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're committed to working in the sex industry, if you feel like this is a place where you belong, hold on to that. Hold on to that idea. Um, and, you know, this being a part of this industry may require tremendous flexibility and creativity and seeing how trends change. It may require change on your part.
Right.
Um, but I believe that there will be a sex industry, and if you want to be a part of it, then stay on top of how it's changing.
Mm-hmm.
Change
Mm-hmm.
as it changes. I think people run into trouble when they don't adapt. Um,
Yeah.
I understand why people don't adapt. Sometimes that's just simply not possible for folks. But if you have the ability to adapt and you want to stay in this industry, I think it will continue, and you can be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, that's the best I can offer right now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't see it going anywhere. Let's put it that way. I mean, I do
Yeah.
not know. I know Donald Trump is trying to take away all our fun, but I don't think that he's going to actually. Um,
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and not to go off on like a political tangent, but I think that every time I see people on the left making arguments of like, after the revolution, there'll be no more sex work. And I'm like, what? Well, who's going to, where is it going to go? um,
yeah,
I have a hard time wrapping my head around that. And it's usually, not sex workers who are making those arguments, almost always, but because that assumes that people's sexual needs are just going to be magically met. And there's always going to be people who have a need for like intimacy, for sexual gratification, for attention, to fill like a void. That's always going to exist.
right, right, and it's so funny you bring that up because I actually do write to that a little bit in the book. I don't. I touch it with my 10-foot pole. I'm like, okay, you know, but what I certainly can say, I mean, since nobody knows one of the things I do talk about capitalism, because I know that that's something that I have to address in the book, and I
Yeah.
just say like capitalism is here to stay.
Mhm.
Nobody
Mm-hmm.
can tell me what a life post capitalism is actually going to look like. So I don't know how useful I find those discussions to be. But
Right.
if we were going to
Right,
talk about,
we can write that book when we get there, right?
oh please, yeah, I know exactly. I mean, like if I could see what we're working towards, I'd be 100% on board. But I'm a little vague on the details right now. But the one thing that we could be working towards, and certainly there are so many different ways to be addressing this, certainly as progressives and people who are thinking along these lines, getting to a place where nobody's doing sex work because they don't want
Sure.
nobody's doing sex work who doesn't want to be doing it.
Right.
Now that is
Mm-hmm.
a future that we can be working towards. And like we
Yeah.
can be looking at universal income, and we can be looking at childcare, and we can be looking at, like all of these different ways that we could provide as a floor for people so that sex work is not the safety net.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what's so profoundly sick and upsetting is all of the denigration of sex work as it's not work, or that the people who do it are degrading themselves, or this is bad. Nobody should be doing it. But then it's like, oh, we also want to hollow out the safety net while we're at it.
Right.
So we don't believe that, people should be engaged in quote unquote good work,
Yeah.
like
Legitimate
decent
work or, yeah.
however you want to say it. But then what are we going to do with people? I mean, we have homeless people, right? So we
Yeah.
know that we're comfortable with people slipping through the cracks. They're on the decisions we make as a society are on display. They're living outside. So
Right.
then how are folks who are marginal, who are struggling, supposed to keep themselves inside? Well, then we're going to say that sex work is, if you're doing sex work, you can't apply for government benefits or whatever the fuck it is. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I get a little riled up when we get political.
No, I know. No, it's but it's a real problem.
It is. And it's upsetting. And I was on a long drive just a few days ago, and I was listening to NPR, and they had two separate stories. They just kind of have these kind of out of nowhere, not related to any news item, just personal stories. And they had two separate personal stories. And one was a trans man meeting up and spending time with his father that he had not been in contact with for 30 years. They went on a road trip
gosh.
together.
Wow.
Yeah, because the father was Christian and traditional, and the son felt like he would never be accepted or seen by his dad. And it was this beautiful little thing where they get together and they really enjoyed their time together, and they talked about that. It was just really, really heartwarming. And then the second story was two gay men in a very small southern town falling madly in love, but one was already in the Marine. One man was already in the Marines, and so they had this wild, hot fling while he was back from a deployment, and then he got redeployed to go back to Iraq. And his lover signed up for the Marines to be with him, and
wow.
And then somewhere in that interval, gay marriage happened, and they were able to get married, and so now they're husbands, and but they were telling this whole story, and it was so heartwarming, it was so amazing, and like we're living through this time of all this incredible change and of mindsets around sexuality. And I was just thinking, like, I'm just wondering if, like, I'm really hoping like 20 or 30 years from now, when I'm driving down the road and I'm listening to NPR, that I'll be hearing somebody come on and say, like, I was really at a crossroad. I was really suffering in my life because I was dealing with all this, whatever is shame, or I was dealing with all this frustration. And I found a sex worker who was able to listen and able to help me and work that stuff out. And I worked through a bunch of my personal shame, and I realized that I wasn't some kind of weird freak, or that I wasn't destined to be lonely. And, and now I've got a partner in my life, or maybe I see sex workers and my life makes more sense now, or whatever it is. But this heartwarming story of sex workers being a part of the fabric of our lives,
Yeah. Yeah. And those stories are so real. Like I don't love losing clients, but I love losing clients who tell me, like, I've decided to move on with my life and I'm getting married, or I'm doing like, I've had that a couple of times where people have, stopped in to tell me that, like, they really appreciated being, like, opened back up again to the possibility of feeling love, or being open, or starting a relationship where they were emotionally available, because part of the reasons that they were seeking out attention of sex workers is because they had a need, but they weren't yet ready to share parts of themselves, and
or unload that shit on amateurs, only to keep her.
But those are
side,
but those are beautiful stories. I love to hear that.
No, totally. Yeah, just the notion that, like, oh my gosh, everyone should get all of their sexual and romantic needs from other amateurs. Like, oh my God. No.
Yeah.
Hey, bro. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be lovely. I think actually we probably talked about this last time you were on, but I do think that we need clients to unload some of their shame in order for our movement to get further.
Yes. There's simply no way the supply side can do it all on their own.
Right.
The demand side needs to stand up and be counted. And of course, we all know The
They don't
demand
want to.
side is many orders of magnitude larger than
Yeah.
the visible
Yeah.
face of the sex industry. We're talking about like,
Yeah,
you know,
that's a good point.
yeah, it's always like, you know, I think in astrological term or astronomical terms, like we're the stars, but there's all that fucking dark matter out there, man. You know, that's what's really running the universe. And that, yeah, that idea that there is an enormous demand.
Right.
So can we talk about that
Yeah.
rather than just simply focusing on the supply as the problem?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna keep pumping that idea out into the universe, and I know hopefully someday we're gonna get some movement on that.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
frustrating on Twitter and stuff like, you know, because you'll see these guys following me and stuff like that. You know, oh, like I support what you do. You're so wonderful. I'm like, well, hey, well, how about you like, you know, get involved? Oh, no, I could never. Like if somebody knew this about me, this would be so awful. It's like, well, I don't know, dude. I walk around. I'm fine. You don't know a bunch of shit about me.
I
You
know.
know
I
a
have lots of
ton.
clients who are like, I could never be as free as you. And I'm like, you know, you could.
You could.
You have to like make some sacrifices for it, but you know, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we can all keep pumping that out into the universe and encouraging the supply side to stand up for sex workers.
That's right, because they sure do love us.
That's a fact. Well, it's always I love talking to you, so I'm so glad that you came on and talked to us again about your new book.
Thank you so much. And I always, this is the second time we've spoken, and I'm just struck by, I'm able to let my freak flag fly a little bit. Like I'm just gonna be like, I'm just gonna dump everything I've ever thought about it on everything on you guys. And you guys are like, no, that's fine, Lola. No, that's good.
We want it. We want it all.
No, I appreciate it.
Wave that flag. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so, because it's you know, these are big questions. These are big issues, and that's definitely what I spend my days thinking about. So it's really, really, really refreshing and lovely to get to talk to you about it. So thank you.
Oh
Likewise.
yeah, thanks for all the work that you do. Where can people find your book and more about the work that you do?
Sure. Well, you can certainly find me at loladavina.com. That's LOLADAVINA. And that's probably the best way to keep track of what's going on new with me. Also, I'm pretty active over on Twitter. Lola, I think it's Lola_Davina at Twitter, but I'm all over there. And in terms of the book, I do have an ebook version that is ready to be launched on September 1st as promised. Unfortunately, being a self-published author, sometimes you're the last to know when something's actually going to get done. So the paperback may be a few days behind, but I am going to have the paperback will be out in September. So just in a few weeks from now. So if you're interested, follow me on Twitter, follow my website, and I will be keeping updates live going on there when I know when stuff is going to drop.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And thanks for chatting with us today.
Oh my goodness. It's so good to talk to you both.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peep Show podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.